DLC, some of the most divisive three letters in gaming. For better or worse, downloadable content has become the norm for the modern game industry, and developers, publishers, and consumers have to plan around it accordingly. Some love it, treating it as more optional content to enjoy for the game they love. Others despise it, viewing it as an excuse to make them pay for something that should be in the base game. At any rate, it's the reality we live in.
Reality is often disappointing.
Of course, that doesn't mean we have to like it. Consumers have the freedom to make decisions and reject the product. That said, to make said decisions fairly, we need information, which we don't have. Game companies and publishers usually aren't willing to share information about how their DLCs are produced, and the average consumer usually does not care to find out, which sometimes leads to online complaining and misinformation whenever DLC gets announced. I've seen this song and dance time and time again over the years. Gamers never changed and likely never will. However, you, my inquisitive, intelligent, and very good-looking viewers, are not the average consumer or gamer. You clicked on this video because you wanted to learn about DLC production. So let's talk about the game production process and where does DLC fit in. Naturally, this answer isn't universal. Every company is different. The ones I previously worked for handled things differently from others. But for the purposes of a general overview in a YouTube video, it should suffice. Everything starts in the prototype phase. This is before any real plans are made. All you have is an idea and a test. You draft your premise, prepare a prototype, and see if the core mechanics are any fun. No art, no music, no story. Keep the team and budget as small as possible. Just use wireframes and default cubes if need be. Splatoon is a good example. It started out as white tofu cubes shooting black soy sauce. All of the Squid Kid aesthetic stuff came in much later. If the prototype identifies critical issues and the project is deemed unviable, it is abandoned or shelved. Sometimes these prototypes resurface or get integrated into different projects. That's one of the ways you get minigames. If the prototype is considered to have potential, it moves into pre-production. This is where initial plans get drafted, concept work begins, and early placeholder assets are made. The game's identity begins taking shape, as dictated by a couple of master game design documents. But the main production itself has not yet begun. That's why this is called pre-production. This is mostly building up the prototype and drafting up lots of production plans for, well, everything. For obvious reasons, DLC is not planned here. After some time, the game's initial direction is decided and plans become more definite, though a lot remains subject to change. The next question for the studio to address is funding. Smaller independent studios typically try to secure a publisher for funding. This involves seeking out multiple publishing companies, showcasing early builds, explaining production plans, and trying to convince them that the game is worth funding. This is not an easy process. Even though the search starts here, one likely won't be found until much later into the production process, so the studio needs to carefully weigh the costs of continuing versus changing plans. Sometimes the opposite happens. A major publisher wants a certain game made using their own IPs and outsourced it to a third-party developer. The studio which gets contracted must then meet required standards, else the project and contract get cancelled or recalled. This is what happened to Metroid Prime 4. It used to be under Bandai Namco but was recalled for not meeting standards and handed to Retro Studios instead. Studios owned by major first-party companies like Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo obviously don't deal with this. In those cases, the proposal instead needs to pass internal review and be approved, a process which I am regrettably unfamiliar with. Big studios and opportunities for gaming don't really exist in Singapore. I can only dream of being such a big shot. Self-publishing is an option, but this requires the developer to either bear the full development cost or seek crowdfunding to ease the burden, which entails substantial financial risk. In most cases, this is usually not by choice. Shovel Knight was forced to self-publish because publishers considered pixel art platformers to be a dead genre at the time. Without support, the studio was forced to set up and handle the full responsibilities of publishing by themselves, and their crowdfunding ran out before development completed, forcing the devs to work without salary for months. I am so glad the game succeeded because the financial repercussions would have been critically dire otherwise. It's more manageable if the studio already has a game or two out in the market, or if the game itself is small in scope. Deltarune's first 2 chapters could be released for free because Undertale's success gave Toby Fox a blank check to do whatever the hell he wants, though he later supplemented his income with music contracts for Pokémon and other projects. Hollow Knight's success provided its devs with enough revenue to self-publish Silksong, letting them sustain development for 7 years, something which no publisher in the world will let them get away with. Anyways, DLC. It's still not not yet planned here. The game's future is still too uncertain. If a studio decides to proceed with production, it enters the, well, production phase. This is a major exercise in project management, as the developer and publisher assemble a full dev team and set up a production timeline. This timeline is divided into a series of intermediate deadlines or sprints. If you've worked in software development and have heard of phrases like agile development or waterfall model, it's more of the same here. By this point, the master game design document, GDD for short, should contain a list of features and content the game is planned to launch with. These range in importance from top priority to must-haves to great to have to keep for future, or keep in view as we like to call it. These content plans get divided up among the sprints, with less essential goals getting produced later and receiving fewer resources. Some of you can tell where this is going. This early stage is where they decide which parts of the original plan will be in the main game, which will be set aside for DLC, and which will be cut completely. As development progresses, other content will also get pushed to DLC. Ideas or features which initially appear simple may end up being more complicated and time-consuming than expected. Developers and producers also tend to have a nasty habit of overestimating their teams or their own abilities. How often have you ever thought, I could deal with this in 3 days, only for it to take 4 or 5 instead?
Let's go, in and out, 20 minutes adventure.
There is also bug testing, which is an ongoing process every sprint. Fixing bugs as you go only adds to development time, and the unpredictable nature of bugs makes this difficult to estimate. The end result is that the whole sprint thing never goes according to plan. All it takes is for one guy to fall sick and everything starts going wrong very fast. A few things missed in one sprint get carried over to a future one, leading to potential snowballing. Nobody is at fault, things go wrong anyway. Of course, just because plans never work doesn't mean you shouldn't plan. He who fails to plan is planning to fail. You can't just casually wing it when it comes to game development, unless you're making Flappy Bird or something. If things get too bad, the devs need to make a choice. Either add more time or make less content. Revising and extending the timeline means more development costs and leaving fans waiting. That's how you get Silksong with its 7-year development. Deadlines are there for a reason. Cutting out content means the game is potentially less impressive at launch. In the past, this content would either get pushed to a sequel or deemed not worthwhile and cut completely. But today, DLC allows that content to arrive into the game. Better late than never. Shovel Knight took this option. It ran out of money, so it shifted a bunch of planned features to post-launch downloads. Neither option is wrong. Sometimes a combination of both get used. Fortunately, as long as the publisher has not yet announced an official release date, there is room to negotiate and make compromises. Release dates. At some point, the publisher will announce an official release date. Depending on how confident they are, the announcement could be anywhere from the middle to late stage of development, but there's no hard rule about this. They could be madmen and announce it early, in which case they are very confident. Or they could announce and immediately release it for viral marketing shenanigans. The murder of Sonic the Hedgehog did this as an April Fool's joke. Deltarune Chapters 3 and 4 also did this, except not as an April Fool's joke. Bear in mind, that doesn't mean the game was finished on that day itself. Depending on the publisher's plans, there could be a gap of weeks to months to even years between the final development cutoff and the planned release date. Nintendo specifically is known for sitting on games for ages until the perfect time to release them. What, did you think all those games for the Mario 40th anniversary all coincidentally happened to be finished exactly this year? Ain't no way Nintendo didn't prep 5+ games far in advance and space their releases out based on marketing plans. They aren't about to pull a Sega and Sonic 06 themselves. Anyways, after the final cutoff, the game goes gold. That means regardless of whatever state it is in, it cannot be revised or modified in any way. It is considered good as gold and sent to the publisher. The weeks leading up to this are typically a mad rush of last-minute bug testing, fixing, and polishing, as the devs attempt to squeeze in everything that remains on their to-do list. After that, everyone goes home and passes out, asleep, or drunk, for a few days, at least. That or throw a huge party. Maybe both. After that, the dev team now moves to post-launch work, where a couple things happen. Just because the game hasn't been publicly launched doesn't mean the devs just twiddle their thumbs for a few months. There's still a list of incomplete low-priority tasks from the final sprint, which the team may continue to work on to prepare some launch patches. Bug testing also continues, because one can never be too sure. Every game nowadays always launches with a couple bugs. That's just the reality of games becoming increasingly complex. Any bugs found have their fixes be included in early patches, with particularly critical ones prioritized for day one. The dev team also gets restructured. Some get assigned to new projects, some get assigned to post-launch support, some quit and leave for elsewhere, and some get laid off. Since the main game's development is complete, the project doesn't need so much manpower anymore, so it's better to reallocate resources or cut expenses. Sounds a bit harsh, but such is the transient nature of software development careers. Anyways, this is where work on DLC begins. The original plans are re-evaluated, a new set of sprints are prepared, and the development cycle begins once again. Now, my dear viewer, based on everything you've heard, you should be able to identify the flaws within some common misconceptions held about DLC. The idea of DLC being stuff which belonged in the base game isn't fully inaccurate. However, this content is usually moved due to production limitations rather than to maximize sales. DLC being content chopped out of the base game to sell doesn't casually happen. While content does intentionally get planned as DLC for sales reasons, this is usually decided upon far in advance, so it was never part of the base game's development to begin with. As for how DLC shouldn't be worked on before release, well, that's already the case. Before going gold, the team would be devoting their full attention to the final deadline, so it's unlikely that any real serious efforts would have been put towards DLC because the deadline is simply a bigger priority. Couldn't they just outsource the DLC or reassign it to less experienced devs? They certainly can. In fact, that happens quite often. But that typically happens after the game goes gold, or is at least in the late stages of development. From personal experience, if the game isn't finished, the outsourced devs are used to support the ongoing development by handling many miscellaneous, less critical tasks like menus, UI work, bug fixing, or game balancing. If they are doing DLC work, then that means that all the important stuff is already complete. Do bad DLC practices exist? Of course. Everything I mentioned earlier assumes a reasonable development cycle by a reasonable developer and publisher. That's the ideal. But the reality is that the games industry is far from reasonable, both to consumers and developers alike. Not every game maker is a starry-eyed dev studio working for their dreams. Games are a business, and business is about money. And as we know, when money gets involved, things get ugly. There are many cases of companies releasing incomplete games or selling DLCs which exploit their consumers. EA in particular does this often. Later entries in the Sims franchise saw many series staple features being intentionally omitted from the base games and sold as DLC. Such games deserve to receive appropriate backlash and sales failure in the world. All the more so considering EA's recent buyout by Saudi Arabia and Jared Kushner, son-in-law of US President Donald Trump. I'm certainly glad that my years-long disdain for EA is totally unrelated to politics, because as a not American, I'd prefer to not get involved in that. Anyways, things have changed in recent times. As social media moves ever faster, people online have become too quick to make hasty judgments and throw accusations based on gut reactions and blind emotion. There are a lot of content creators who are spreading opinions without knowing anything, and many consumers parroting said opinions without thinking. There's now so much misinformation and noise online that it's now much harder to distinguish between legitimate complaints and pointless whining, making it more difficult for consumers to fairly evaluate a game purchase. And when everything is being accused of being anti-consumer corporate greed, cases of actual corporate greed are able to more easily sneak under the radar. You know the line, when everyone's super, no one is. But why do these misconceptions misconceptions exist in the first place? Well, as I mentioned at the start of the video, most gamers don't know nor care about how the development process works. At the end of the day, consumers only care about the final product and not about the creators, process, or logistical difficulties. That's just how it is. Of course, that's nobody's fault. It isn't the responsibility of a consumer to know these things. The onus lies on the developer and publisher to sell their product. Publishing companies understand this and so work around these misconceptions instead of trying to correct them. Nobody wants to pull a Sisyphus. Since gamers tend to believe that DLC only gets made after the game's release, publishers intentionally play into that misconception, avoiding potential marketing pitfalls but indirectly reinforcing the misconception in the process. The DLC may be completed in the time period between the game going gold and the public release, but the publisher will try to avoid announcing the DLC until after the release. This ensures there is no grounds for such claims to take root, and also keeps attention focused solely on the base game's release, making for a more focused marketing campaign. The only times DLC are announced in advance are when a game is heavily focused on online multiplayer or involves a live service structure. Fighting games like Guilty Gear, shooters like Marvel Rivals, and racers like Sonic Racing Cross Worlds often announce the existence of paid DLC and season passes before their game's release, and fans are okay or even enthusiastic about it. Inversely, single-player focused genres rarely do this, and players often react negatively towards them. Games like Xenoblade Chronicles and Legend of Zelda take care to announce their DLCs long after their game's releases. This double standard exists due to the nature of their respective genres. Multiplayer-focused games perceive DLC as a form of long-term support, helping keep an otherwise repetitive experience fresh. Single-player games perceive DLC as an optional add-on to an otherwise already complete experience. If a single-player focused game announces DLC before the game is released, the add-on ends up looking less optional and the base game looks less complete. Publishers will want to avoid that impression, so if a single-player game does announce DLC before release, there has to be external circumstances forcing them to do so. Time to address the elephant Pokémon in the room. Legends Z-A announced their DLC before their game's release, and the online reaction shows why publishers never do this. Despite the DLC only releasing in February next year, a lot of misinformation has already spread, and you now have people thinking it's available at launch or accusing Pokémon Company for being greedy. People really overestimate how important game sales are relative to the rest of the franchise. DLC sales are a drop in an ocean compared to merchandising. Let's get this out of the way. Legends Z-A's DLC was announced now because this is the best time for it, or rather, the least worst time for it. Next year is the franchise's 30th year anniversary, and Pokémon Day is in February. Gen 10 is absolutely getting announced there, and there will likely be many other high-profile game announcements too. If the DLC were to be announced on or after that date, it would be quickly buried under all the other announcements and lose all marketing momentum. However, the game could not be released earlier because Nintendo and TPC want to release Z-A as close to the Christmas window as possible. Gotta get it into as many kids' hands as you can. That leaves an incredibly small window to announce and build hype for the DLC in. Remember that marketing goes beyond just going, "I've come to make an announcement." There needs to be trailers and hype build-up. That requires time. With February as the final deadline and the game releasing in mid-October, there is only a window of 2 months to start building up hype, since a few weeks need to be allocated for players to play and digest the base game. Too little time to both announce and market a DLC. There isn't enough time to space out everything, so the announcement was forced to be dropped early to free up time. The online confusion is written off as an unavoidable cost. This is the least worst option. Could I have just told you about the Pokemon stuff in 1 minute? Yes, I could. But if I did, would you have learned anything? You would know the answer, but not understand the answer. I started this channel to help people better understand and appreciate game design and development, and you can't really learn anything from a 1-minute TikTok style video. Maybe I should look into becoming a university lecturer in future. I certainly yap enough to be one. Anyways, I hope you did learn something about the game production process or DLC. I'll try not to delve into too much detail because this is just a YouTube video, but I hope it covered the essential points. Do you agree with my explanation or disagree? Or have you also worked in a game company and does your own experience differ from mine? Do let me know if you do. I'm quite curious about how things are done elsewhere. Whatever your thoughts may be, do let me know in the comments. Don't worry, I won't take anything personally. Opinions are divisive by nature, and we as consumers have a right to our own thoughts. Nobody is always correct. Certainly not me. All we can do is try our best. Anyways, if you still want to hear me yap, then here's another video. If not, then I'll see you next time.